Welcome to Inside Track with Bruce Ash and Ed Wilkinson on the Live the Dream Media Network.
It's termite season.
Hi, it's me.
And bugs fear the blue trucks from Essential Pest Control.
Go blue at Essential Pest Control. We'll eliminate those bugs, bees, and termites. And stop paying too much to that national provider. Buy local for great service and affordable rates. Call Essential Pest Control because termites fear the blue.
Run for your life.
Call for the blue trucks from Essential Pest Control. 886-3029. That's 886-3029. Or check online at essentialpest.com.
This is Ed Wilkinson with Wilkinson Wealth Management, where we manage money for gun owners. What does it mean to retire comfortably and remain comfortably retired? It means designing a plan that allows you to do the things you want to do, outpace inflation, and never run out of money in your lifetime. If you want to retire comfortably and remain comfortably retired, call me, Ed Wilkinson, at 777-1911. That's 777-1911 or WilkinsonWealthMGMT.com.
I'm proud to welcome my good friends at Tucson Iron and Metal Retail to Inside Track as an advertiser. Jamie Kipper and her staff are conservation experts. They sell round and square steel tubing, metal plate and roofing materials, as well as new and used steel, aluminum, and stainless steel to ranchers, artists, interior designers, roofers, as well as you do-it-yourselfers out there. Tucson Iron and Metal Retail is open Monday through Fridays, 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., and Saturdays, 8 a.m. to noon. Tucson Iron and Steel Retail, 701 East 36th Street. Call 520-209-1576. That's 520-209-1576, or go to TucsonIronRetail.com. Come by and be sure to ask for Jamie. Tucson Iron and Steel Retail, this is what conservation and repurposing is all about.
Inside his protective underground bunker, I'm coming to you live and in color from the Ultra Luxe Wilkinson Wealth Management Studio, welcoming you to a special China edition of Inside Track. Malta Joe is pushing buttons and making things go right. You can call him to talk with us or our guest at 520-771-5101 or send a message to us on Facebook Live or on YouTube. We've got an awesome guest for you on Inside Track. But before we hear from our guest, we missed talking Memorial Day weekend. Hey, Bruce?
Right here.
Yeah, let's talk about Memorial Day weekend.
Yeah, we missed Memorial Day last week. We were kind of in the elbow between our last show and Memorial Day. And Evan, I hope you had a contemplative and thankful Memorial Day. I was fortunate to attend another Memorial Day observance in Star Park on Monday in Coronado. The featured speaker was Marine Major General Martin Savage, who commands the 1st Marine Division at Camp Pendleton, who spoke briefly but passionately about those he served with and the importance of remembering the fallen who have made the ultimate sacrifice to preserve liberty. I have to admit, I got very emotional seeing the family of Special Warfare Operator Charlie Keating IV, who lost his life north of Mosul, leading his fellow SEAL members to protect villagers who were being run over by ISIS fighters in a key battle there, which helped defeat ISIS. His family has been at every ceremony for over a decade since he lost his life. Charlie's life was for a blessing, and the organization, the C4 Foundation, named for him, continues to help Navy families everywhere. So let's do a quick shout out for our great Inside Track supporters, my company, Paul Ash Commercial Real Estate, Jamie and Craig at Tucson Iron and Metal Surplus, Eric Rudin at Essential Pest, and of course, my broadcast partners company, Wilkinson Wealth Management. We support each of these locally owned businesses, and so should you. And one more point. Each of our sponsors support Inside Track because they believe in helping spread conservative ideas and American values. Help them keep us on the air by supporting them also. And let them know you heard about their business on Inside Track. Here's my co-host, Eb Wilkinson.
Let's get right to our special guest today, former Department of Defense official and vice chairman of the Committee on the Present Danger, China, opinion maker and frequent national guest, Frank Gaffney, on national security and the global threat from the CCP and Iran. Frank, thanks for joining us.
It's a privilege. Thank you for having me.
News from South China Morning Post, owned by Alibaba, by the way. China accuses Taiwan of thousands of cyber attacks against China. Look who's calling the kettle black. Isn't that headline a misdirection, considering countless cyber attacks on Taiwan and countless attacks on nations around the world with whom they compete with on a global basis, day in and day out?
I think it's fair to say that's at the very least what it is. Bigger to my mind is it a pretext for the Chinese to do at last what they have been threatening to do for many years and preparing to do in a very concerted way, especially recently? Indeed, so much so that the commander of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, Admiral Samuel Paparo, has said what the Chinese are doing with respect to the movement and demonstrations of their various military forces surrounding the island of Taiwan, overflying it, firing missiles over it, and otherwise very actively threatening that island democracy allied with us, is not just exercises. These are rehearsals. This is actual preparation for that, at a minimum, isolation of the island with a blockade, a quarantine, if you will, or worse yet, an actual invasion of it. And that's the thing that I think is now in the offing.
So should they do a blockade, where do you think Trump comes in on that?
I think his instincts are that this is not good for the United States. And yet, I think he has also signaled that the proximity of the island to China, the kinds of forces that they have built up, particularly over the past 4 years, and the ability to project very, very immense power in the region, may make this too hard for the United States to do much about. So these two, considerations are in a somewhat dynamic tension. My own hope is that it translates into a redoubled effort to deter the Chinese from thinking that they can get away with strangulating Taiwan, let alone seizing it. But this is the moment of truth. It's at hand, I fear, as the Chinese, for their own reasons, and one of them that we ought to talk about is difficulties at home. Xi Jinping is, as you know so well, facing a variety of very, very severe economic and political and demographic crises that quite possibly are conducing to him believing that this is the time for him to do what he has long promised to do, that Mao Zedong, his role model, couldn't accomplish, and that he is determined to effect during his time in office, namely the as he likes to say, the reunification. This is not a correct characterization. The reunification, though, is his line, of Taiwan with the mainland by force, if necessary.
Wow. So the Committee on Present Danger, China is one of the few who, amongst so many so-called legitimate news sources, that the CCP has penetrated our America's power grid. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, this has been a passion of mine since I was in the Pentagon and first learned that not only was it possible for a hostile power to try to degrade our deterrent forces by using a phenomenon known as electromagnetic pulse, detonating in the sort of low space exoatmospheric zone, a nuclear weapon to shower the entire continent with intense levels of electromagnetic energy, frying electrical components in our various military hardware. The knock on effect, though, uh, much of that hardware has been shielded against these phenomena for obvious reasons, but not so the civilian grid, the electric power, they call it the bulk electric power generation and distribution system, better known as the grid. And the trouble here, Ed, is that we have now had years of warnings. In 2004, information that I was exposed to in the Pentagon on a classified basis was declassified by something called the Electromagnetic Threat Commission, created by Congress for the purposes of establishing, how serious a problem did we have. And back in 2004, this distinguished blue ribbon commission said it's an acute problem. It's only gotten worse for the reason that you mentioned, Ed, and that is that the Chinese have successfully gotten literally inside our wires. We learned recently that solar panels that we've been buying in copious quantities as part of this Green New Deal business have, devices in them that can turn them off or even destroy them at will, causing calculable problems for our grid. But worse than that, even for years, the Chinese have been selling us high voltage transformers, which make up the backbone of the grid, the thing that essentially allows energy to be generated in one place and used in a very distant place. Without those transformers, you're toast. And we know that at least 2 of the 400, maybe even 500 of these devices have back doors, and presumably the rest do as well, that would enable the Chinese at will to take them offline, if not destroy them outright. These are the sorts of problems that make the vulnerability of the grid that have been obvious for years acute. And, I'm thinking lawyers have a term for example, a swimming pool that doesn't have a fence around it. It's called an attractive nuisance.
Sure.
Well, the dangers that our grid has of perhaps catastrophic takedown constitutes the greatest attractive nuisance in history. And I'm afraid that countries like China understand very well what they could do to us by taking them offline.
So one of the things that concerns me is you've got Obama, who basically brought in solar grids by the millions and put them up on our military bases. Davis Monthan here in Tucson is a perfect example. They've got acres and acres and acres of solar panels, ions produced by China.
Almost certainly.
You're saying there's a back door. They can shut it off or fry it at will.
Well, they've been called kill switches. I don't know if that's a technical term or not, but that would be the practical effect. Yeah, at the very least, I think they're capable of disabling them. And maybe that's sufficient for the Chinese. One of the things that we've learned over the years is that the Chinese Communist Party, going back to Deng Xiaoping, who was the general secretary back about the time that my old boss Ronald Reagan successfully took down the Soviet Union. And he said then to his team, the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union is over. The Soviets lost. A new Cold War has begun between the United States and China will win. And one of the things he said as a directive to some of his military, specifically those units assigned to biological warfare, was that their mission is to depopulate the United States so that it can be colonized by China. Now, if you aspire to colonize the United States, in other words, invade it, take it over, it sure would be nice to have all that infrastructure essentially ready to be just, rebooted rather than physically destroyed. But whether they physically disable them temporarily or whether they permanently destroy them, that is a real risk at Davis Moncton and in places across America at this point.
Well, and also the transformers that you were talking about. What do we do at this point? Do we just start replacing all of them one at a time? What do we do?
It's a very hard problem. It's not one of making overnight, and it will not be fixed overnight. In fact, this is an interesting story. Donald Trump, when he was president the first time around, looked at the then 200 or so of these whole high voltage transformers from China in the grid and said, we're not going to do this anymore. We're not going to buy any more of these. One of the very first things that Joe Biden did when he came to office, literally day one, was to rescind that executive order enabling more to be bought. And I think that 200 or maybe even 300 more have been bought. The point is, each and every one of those is essentially designed by certain specs to be at one point in the grid where its unique characteristics are required. Getting them is not something that you go down to Walmart and pluck one off the shelf, even from China. You have to order them. You have to get them designed to your specifications. And it takes a year on a good day, if you're at the front of the line, to get them.
Wow.
Replacing 400 or 500, if the Chinese were not helping especially, which is unlikely, is very problematic indeed. So one of the things that I think this argues for, and I appreciate the chance to talk to you about this question of the grid. I've been really frantic about it for years. I had a full head of hair when I started worrying about this, and I pulled it all out. The truth of the matter is that where we find ourselves today is we're going to have a new grid. We're going to have to redesign it so that we're not as dependent on those long power lines enabled by these big transformers to move energy from, remotely located power generation facilities. We're going to need things like small modular reactors that are close by where they're needed. There's a lot of talk these days, as I'm sure you're aware, of the interest in data centers, these huge, establishments that fuel the kind of processing that you need for artificial intelligence. Well, increasingly, and Donald Trump has spoken about this in connection with some of these data centers, they're building generation plants right beside them so that you don't have to worry about getting the power to them. And by the way, you also have to have them be reliable. Those solar farms and those wind farms don't work most of the day. And therefore, they don't become a source of routine, regular, dependable power to things like data centers that desperately need them. And by the way, so do the rest of us.
So, if you put if you put one of the small modular reactors right next to a data center, or in a city like San Diego or Tucson or Phoenix or wherever, you really don't need that long of an extension cord that as you're saying, we're going to be less dependent upon those transformers.
You bet. I think you get away from them altogether, ideally, but that isn't going to be done overnight either. The reactors have to be built, or even if you're just putting in a continuous cycle, gas-powered generation facility, that's not a trivial piece either. And those are back ordered as well. The point is that we've been on notice for decades that this is a problem. We have not allowed that problem to be solved. And I blame, frankly, principally the electric utilities who haven't wanted to fool with all of this and have consistently interposed objections when state legislatures, for example, notably in Texas, which has the wisdom to have its own grid, tried to do something to make it more resilient, they were stopped at every single turn. A wonderful state senator there by the name of Bob Hall has been on this consistently, and he's been so frustrated. And I think 4 consecutive sessions, they only meet every 2 years down there in Texas, as you know. He's not been able to get this thing done. So this is past time, in other words. And we're going to have to come up with some workarounds, I think, right quick, because especially if, as I fear, the Chinese Communist Party is now, for its own internal reasons or for other foreign policy calculations or considerations or whatever, decides to move from the kind of unrestricted warfare that fellow Deng Xiaoping set in motion to win the Cold War when they weren't militarily strong enough to take us on, through all kinds of economic warfare and political warfare and intelligence and subversion and well, maybe electromagnetic pulse or even biological warfare. All of this was laid out in a very important book called Unrestricted Warfare by 2 colonels in the People's Liberation Army back in 1999.
Wow.
Since then, in 2019, they announced that they were going to begin a people's war against the United States, moving to a whole of society preparation for an even more intensive war. And where we find ourselves today, I fear, is that they may now be at the point where they think they can safely, successfully move into the old-fashioned kind of warfare, the shooting kind as well.
So you've got 37,000 approximately Chinese males between the ages of 18 and 35 that come across the border from Mexico into the U.S. I'm sure they're just here to cook in the kitchens and do things like that. You know, I can't see any reason to believe that they could be war fighters. What do you have major concerns about that?
I do, and not least because I fear that number is frankly very, very low. I've heard some estimates there may be 4 times that number.
Wow.
And these are people who are, yes, they're military-age men. They've come across the border without families, oftentimes in small groups. They act like, People's Liberation Army personnel, maybe special forces elements.
Right.
Think about this. That could mean that we've got 5 or more divisions of Chinese military inside the United States right now. I worry about that tremendously. As you know, this is one of those things that if you wish to bring down the country, the grid, for example, or our leadership or our economy or our transportation sector, I mean, basically anything that would be needed, for example, for the United States military to come to the aid of Taiwan or otherwise resist what the Chinese are able to do in the Western Pacific, to friends and allies, and certainly our strategic interests there, including our own real estate like Guam or even Hawaii. Those kinds of units capable of doing things that generate chaos here is incalculably important to that kind of operation. And when you think about it, what 19 amateurs did,
Yeah.
at the behest of Osama bin Laden to us on 9/11, think about what 100, let alone 1,000, let alone 120,000 Chinese military professionals could do to screw us up. So one of the things that if I may just make a prescription here, one of the things that I think is absolutely vital is to figure out, where are these guys? We know Joe Biden let them in. In fact, they were processed in more rapidly than had been the case during the Trump years, when it was trivial numbers. But the point is that what's taken place since, where did they go? What are they doing? Maybe some are working, as you say, in Chinese restaurants. But we need to crowdsource with the American people their help in identifying these individuals and helping the authorities find them and root them out. And by the way, if I could just on this point, that United Health executive who was murdered on the streets of New York. The assailant, who's now standing trial, was not picked up on the basis of, surveillance cameras in New York City, or for that matter, the efforts of law enforcement, there and elsewhere. It was a guy flipping burgers in a Altoona, Pennsylvania McDonald's, who had the presence of mind to remember what he just saw on that wanted poster and identify the guy and turn him in. That's what we need, is the help of the American people, but they have to be clued up on, frankly, all of the things that we've just been talking about and more.
And that's not happening
Frank.
fast enough.
Not nearly.
Evan, Frank.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hey, Bruce here. We're going to need to take a quick break to hear from our great sponsors. When we come back, I'd like Frank to speculate on whether or not the actions taken by the Biden administration during that 4-year term, that disastrous 4-year term, were accidental, or if they had intent to create these problems for the United States. So we'll be right back in about 3 minutes with our special guest, Frank Gaffney from the Committee on the Present Danger of China. No channel flipping. Evan and I will be right back.
You're listening to Inside Track with Bruce Ash on the Live the Dream Media Network. Now a word from our sponsor.
It's termite season.
Hi, it's me.
And bugs fear the blue trucks from Essential Pest Control.
Go blue at Essential Pest Control. We'll eliminate those bugs, bees, and termites. And stop paying too much to that national provider. Buy local for great service and affordable rates. Call Essential Pest Control, because termites fear the blue.
Run for your life.
Call for the blue trucks from Essential Pest Control. 886-3029. That's 886-3029. Or check online at essentialpest.com.
This is Ed Wilkinson with Wilkinson Wealth Management, where we manage money for gun owners. What does it mean to retire comfortably and remain comfortably retired? It means designing a plan that allows you to do the things you want to do, outpace inflation, and never run out of money in your lifetime. If you want to retire comfortably and remain comfortably retired, call me, Ed Wilkinson, at 777-1911. That's 777-1911, or WilkinsonWealthMGMT.com.
I'm proud to welcome my good friends at Tucson Iron and Metal Retail to Inside Track as an advertiser. Jamie Kipper and her staff are conservation experts. They sell round and square steel tubing, metal plate and roofing materials, as well as new and used steel, aluminum, and stainless steel to ranchers, artists, interior designers, roofers, as well as you do-it-yourselfers out there. Tucson Iron and Metal Retail is open Monday through Fridays, 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., and Saturdays, 8 a.m. to noon. Tucson Iron and Steel Retail, 701 East 36th Street. Call 520-209-1576. That's 520-209-1576, or go to TucsonIronRetail.com. Come by and be sure to ask for Jamie. Tucson Iron and Steel Retail. This is what conservation and repurposing is all about.
Welcome back to Inside Track with Bruce Ash on the Live the Dream Media Network. Now back to our show.
Broadcasting in the Wilkinson Wealth Management Studio. This portion of the show brought to you by Essential Pest. You can trust the Essential pros when you contact Essential or any of our supporters like Wilkinson Wealth Management, my company, Paul Ash Commercial Real Estate, Tucson Iron and Metal, surplus for Essential Pest. Let them know you heard about them listening to Evan Bruce on Inside Track. We ask that you support them because they support us. Now let's go back and return to talking with Frank Gaffney. Gents, I left you with a real quick question before the break. How likely is it that the problems now caused by tens of thousands of military-age Chinese males, as well as the way that decisions were reversed on grid protection, how likely is it that these were intentional and not just coincidental or or random things that happen that have made us more vulnerable.
I think Frank stepped away for a minute. So Bruce, it looks like it's you and me for the moment. I got to tell you, I have real concerns when not only did they not sneak across the border, they came across the border, were welcomed with open arms. They had less than $10,000 in their pocket, but they had thousands of dollars in their pocket. They were given plane tickets anywhere in the U.S. They were given a cell phone, which they promptly threw away because the cell phone's tracking. They were given a report date or not, but those are the people that we know about just recently. What about all the ones that Frank was talking about that we don't know about? This is
true.
This is huge.
There's no question. There's no question that there is an excessive number of potential foreign agents who landed here, both welcomed by us and those who snuck across in the middle of the night. I heard a news report, not from Fox, but from CBS News yesterday, saying that part of the reason that Harvard College is so upset with the Trump administration is that 80% of their student population are foreign nationals. Many of them Chinese from that nation. It is incredible the way that we have disregarded our defense and our systems here in this country because of just lax or intentional behavior by this government.
Now, Frank, welcome back.
Thank you.
Okay, Bruce, go ahead and ask your question again.
So, Frank, we saw. Well, let me relate a situation to you just this morning. Sheriff Mark Daniels from Cochise County here in southeast Arizona reported that he delivered on behalf of the border sheriffs here in America a 16-point plan to help build up the border against penetration. He traveled to El Paso to give that report to Secretary Mayorkas, and he was assured that he would study it and get back to him. Weeks and weeks went past. Sheriff Daniels contacted people working for Mayorkas, no reply. He eventually went back and talked with him personally and said, "Hey, I gave you this thing from the Border Sheriffs of America. What's happening? I gave you this report. Where is it?" He says, "Oh, you gave me a report? I had no idea." Daniels had handed this specifically to him. This sort of either unintentional or intentional, which do you think it is? Intentional malfeasance or just out and out irresponsibility?
I don't think you can explain what the Biden administration did with opening our borders to anything other than purposeful, intentional harm to the country. This was a design, I personally believe, to, well, as Barack Obama famously put it, fundamentally transform America by changing the demographics with a view to altering our politics and also, I think, creating dynamics inside the country that would lead to its weakening and the advantage of its enemies, foreign, yes, and domestic. You simply cannot describe all that was done, and done in the face of abundant warnings that it was having a deleterious effect, and political costs associated with doing it, to inadvertence or simple incompetence. This was a wrecking operation, as I believe the Biden administration was writ large.
One of the perfect examples there, in 2023, 2024, there were 277,398 Chinese students studying in U.S. universities, they don't just randomly come over here. If you're a Chinese citizen and you say, hey, I want to go study in the American universities, you just don't randomly get to raise your hand and go. You're being sent by the CCP. Yes?
Right. Absolutely. You are oftentimes a family member of a party part of the elite, for one thing. And you are certainly not going to be sent if there's any reason to believe you will not faithfully implement the laws of China, which call for you to do whatever you're told by the Chinese Communist Party. And if that's espionage, if that's recruitment of individuals to become part of the Thousand Talents program or otherwise aid the various Chinese influence operations and penetrations. We talked about the grid, but that's just one example of it. You don't come to the United States from China. If you conform, if you're a good communist, or if you are a trusted one, or if you are a princeling of the elite, then that's okay. And they've got, as you say, nearly 300,000 of them inside the United States right now. What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah. Frank, what is cattle? Not the steak that we cooked last night, but what is cattle?
Yeah. CATL is an acronym for a company known as the Contemporary Amperage Technology Limited. But it goes by the acronym CATL for obvious reasons. It is an example of what the Pentagon has designated as a Chinese military company operating in the United States. And one might well ask, why are there any Chinese military companies operating in the United States, let alone a list of 60 or so that the Pentagon has amassed? And that's, by the way, only a portion of what we have reason to believe are out there. This one is an electric battery manufacturer. It's the dominant one in the world, and it has been bringing to our electric vehicle manufacturing folks their batteries, and they've been trying to build a plant in Michigan for that purpose. But the point about that being a Chinese military company is that they also are putting advanced electrical batteries rather in non-nuclear Chinese submarines, making them far more lethal, able to operate underwater for longer times and cover more territory in that mode, which generally means very quiet. We actually had one of these conventionally powered submarines, a Song class, I think it was called, back in 2006, if I'm not mistaken, pop up in the middle of one of our carrier battle groups. They've been undetected. And if they're able to use that quiet and stealthy operation in even greater numbers over a vastly larger area against our carriers or other naval vessels or merchant ships or anything else for that matter, it will greatly intensify the danger to our personnel, our uniformed personnel, of course, men and women serving on these ships, but also probably the rest of us as well. And this is what is so crazy about the fact that, as you know, Eb, you're in this line of work, two of Wall Street's preeminent firms, Jamie Dimon's JP Morgan and Brian Moynihan's Bank of America, together with supporting roles by Ted Pick's Morgan Stanley and David Solomon's Goldman Sachs, actually raised $4.4 billion in the largest, they call it IPO, it's actually a secondary placement, out of Hong Kong this year for this company, CATL. In other words, American
we're
titans
funding.
are getting American investors, their clients, among others, to put money into the pockets of the Chinese Communist Party and even its military directly for the purpose of building weapons with which to kill us.
Wow.
This
You and I,
is insane.
yeah, you
And if I could just quickly, you mentioned Joe Biden and his legacy. One of the things that made this all possible, or at least greatly enabled much of it, some estimates $2 to $5 trillion migrating from American pension funds and mutual funds and so on at Wall Street's instigation with the Chinese Communist Party, the beneficiary, thanks to a deal that Joe Biden helped engineer back in May of 2013 when he was vice president of the United States, that enabled the Chinese to have privileged access to our capital markets, if you can believe it. They don't have to conform with our securities laws or regulations. You know all about what that entails. No American company has similar access. No other foreign company has that access. Only the Chinese, and they have used it for the purposes of building up their military power and their Belt and Road Initiative and their repression at home and so much more, thanks in part to mostly unwitting American investors. It's a scandal.
exactly. So if you're an investor, if you have a 401k, if you have mutual funds, dig into it, find out what it is, get rid of those companies that are doing business with the Chinese, get rid of cattle, get rid of Jamie Dimon, take your money out of JP Morgan, cut up your Bank of America credit card, get out of there. You know, we have to start somewhere, and that's a great place to start. You know, you're talking about the Chinese submarine that popped up in the Carrier Battle Group. You and I talked about this, 3 or 4 weeks ago. My view as to why they did that, I mean, they could have stayed down below and stayed hidden. They wanted to prove that it could be done, and they wanted us to know it.
You bet. Yeah, no, look, the Chinese generally are big on signaling. You know, they don't do much, accidentally. They're mostly in a very patient but very studied way trying to influence us, and I think in this case to alarm us at the power that the Chinese Navy had back then. And by the way, in the intervening period, they have substantially surpassed us in the number of ships that they have built, warships, various kinds, submarines among them, and now their industrial base for making those ships is estimated to be 200 times the size of ours.
Wow.
Think about that.
Jeez.
What a threat that represents.
What action has Congress taken on cattle, and is anyone leading the charge to stop or at least slow cattle down?
Well, the deal has been done now. They've raised $4.4 billion, as I say, and more in the subsequent period, but in that IPO, as they called it. The guy who has been, I think, by far the most proactive about this and specifically warned JP Morgan's Jamie Dimon and Brian Moynihan of Bank of America not to do this deal. His name is Chairman John Molinar of the House Select Committee on China. He's out of Michigan. He's been confronting what cattle's been trying to do in his state to put this battery plant there. He's been opposing that. And he basically said to these guys, look, I demand, that's the word used in their press release, I demand that you forego this for the obvious reasons. Oh, and by the way, this company, Cattle, is also believed by John Molinar, by Mark Green, the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, and a guy you've heard of. At the time, he was the ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee. He's now the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. They wrote back in, I think, the summer of last year, Cattle is also a slave labor exploiting company.
Yeah.
So all the more reason not to want to do business with them, let alone fund their activities. And here's the kicker. When John Molinar said, if you go ahead with this, I'm going to insist that you provide all kinds of documents. I think it was a 13-page letter that just enumerated a data dump that wouldn't quit. These guys have, I think, just brazened it out. They think that he's not going to be able to hold them to account. I hope they are proven wrong. And we strongly support what John Molinar has been doing in this space, as in so many others, to really lead in awakening the American people to the danger that we face from the Chinese Communist Party. And as you said a moment ago, Ed, practical things that we can do to try to counter what they're up to, not least of which is stop underwriting the enemy, for heaven's sakes.
Absolutely. Bruce, you've been quiet.
Well, we started underwriting the Chinese government when we allowed them into the WTO, made them part of the most favored nations status. And it's been like, Katie barred the door ever since. Frank, you wrote a book recently, I think it was sometime in 23, maybe early 24, called The Indictment. Talk about that book and why it's important for people to read it to understand what's going on in the world today.
Well, thank you, Bruce. This is a book that basically came out of, I think, the first 70 or so of the webinars that our Committee on the Present Danger China has been conducting basically weekly. And they're just a fantastic resource. They're available for free at presentdangerchina.org. I encourage people to subscribe so that they get word of the coming attractions. But just using those first 70, we wanted to lay out the indictment. Yes, the idea that what people, including the Chinese Communist Party, obviously, but also their friends, as they call them, here inside the United States, talk about penetration. They have been actively recruiting people in academia and the media and business, and most especially the financial sector, but also in government, to basically go along with what they're doing, if not actually abet it in various ways, certainly at least be passive in the face of it, no matter how threatening it obviously is. So the indictment was basically a call for us, at the bare minimum, in the court of public opinion, to say what these guys are doing, their old friends here, as well as the Chinese communists, is unacceptable and must be held to account. And one of the things that I think, again, Congressman Molinar has started doing with respect to JP Morgan and Bank of America is raising the profile, not only of these companies, but of the individuals who lead them. And that's what I think needs to be done here most especially. I personally believe what they're doing is treason, that it is betraying our country. It is enabling our enemy to be more dangerous and to ultimately be able to kill more of us. And not, by the way, not just our men and women in uniform in the Pacific, but here at home as well. That has to be made utterly unacceptable. And ultimately, I think that's something that Article 3 courts ought to be charged with prosecuting as well. But for the moment, it would be enormously helpful if your audience would go to presentdangerchina.org and take action. There's a button right there. There's also a donate button. If you'd like to help with the funding of it, that would be great. But at least take action. And when you do, we want the President of the United States to be encouraged for what he did back in February of this year, February 21st to be precise. He issued a national security presidential memorandum that called for a, quote, America First investment policy, unquote, which really is essentially aligned with exactly what we've been talking about in our Committee on the Present Danger China work, both with respect to inbound investment from China and things like this cattle plant in Michigan, and outbound investment in particular, where again, Americans by the millions are having their money transferred by and large without their knowledge to our enemy. And here's the thing. If I'm right, and I pray to God I'm wrong, I would much rather be wrong than right about this. But if there is a shooting war with China in prospect, ladies and gentlemen, If you're among the 100 and so million Americans who have money in the capital markets, and your money is invested, at least part of it, in a balanced portfolio in emerging markets, you have money in the Chinese Communist Party, and you are not going to get it back in the event that there is a conflict. It's just that simple. So one of the other things that we very strongly are recommending, and you can seek guidance from my friend Eb Wilkerson, take your money, ensure that whether it's your pension fund or a mutual fund or your college savings funds or other savings accounts, exchange traded funds, index funds, you name it, make sure that it is all ex-China and ex-Hong Kong, by the way, as well. That means that the investments are in emerging markets other than in China or Hong Kong. That will send a powerful signal to the Chinese. I think it will also help us attenuate dramatically the kind of growing threat that we face from that quarter.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, Frank, thanks very much for joining us this morning on Inside Track. Em and I are going to have a discussion. He's released any sort of investments that we have in Chinese companies. When you mentioned emerging worlds, it just occurred to me for the first time that perhaps some of our money, which is in emerging funds in different investments we have, is at risk as well. And if your loyalty to this country and to all of us living here in America doesn't make any sense to you, the threat of having your money basically stolen from you in the event of any kind of a serious confrontation between our country and China ought to scare the living bejesus out of you. How does our audience find out more about you and how they can support the Committee on the Present Danger China?
Well, thank you. The parent organization, if you will, the organization that is now sponsoring this coalition, is the Institute for the American Future. We also have ones focused on the globalist threat, on what I call the Sharia supremacist threat, on the threat of the spiritual warfare, as well as trying to make our military great again. All of that is at usfuture.org. You can learn more about what we're doing, how we are operating as what we call the special forces in the war of ideas, and how you can make a tax-deductible contribution at usfuture.org to make it all possible. We'd be deeply grateful if you check it out.
But I hope you join us again soon. Continue the fight. We can't afford to lose this battle. Best of luck to you.
Thank you. God bless you guys.
That's going to do it. That's going to do it for today on Inside Track. Thanks for joining us this morning. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and X for news and our views on the news. Until next week, when we have another great guest for you, Peter Moskos, his new book, Back from the Brink, lessons about how we in Tucson can learn from very, very smart people in law enforcement, how to take our city back again. This is Bruce Ash and
Eb Wilkinson.
Wishing you a very good morning. We'll see you again in 167 hours.
Welcome to Inside Track with Bruce Ash and Ed Wilkinson on the Live the Dream Media Network.